Hello and welcome to another History After Hours podcast. This is November 21st, 2017. It is season 3, episode 12. And this is one of our live podcasts in front of the students. So we did 7 of these for 7 periods in the day where we had multiple students come in and ask questions on virtually every topic you could think of, current events and crazy stuff and artificial intelligence and you name it. So stay tuned. There was some great questions. There was some debates that occurred on the podcast. So you can find us once again on YouTube or Facebook or Twitter or SoundCloud, and you can just search for History After Hours. Once again, thank you so much for listening to the podcast. Please share, comment, post some questions, whatever, and we will see you later. Thank you. State your name for the record.
I'm Russell Gartner. Okay. Moving to the other side of the world, Canada's trying to implement a law that you have to tell or say people's pronouns by like what they want. Yeah. And do you think that will be?
So you're talking about gender pronouns?
Yes. Yeah. So
what are the options?
It's like just 70 of them, I think.
Yeah, there's like 70 of them, and like if you don't do it, you can get fined or even thrown in jail. Do you think that will help society at all in any way?
No.
I don't. I mean, I don't walk around right now. I guess we do that when we say Mr. or Ms. or Mrs. I guess that's what we're sort of talking about. Like, I don't know.
Well, here's the deal. I don't mind. I'll try to do my best to call you whatever you want to be called. I don't care. But if I'm getting fined or if there's some law against me having forgetting.
Yeah.
That was the thing, like with the Bruce Jenner thing. It's like that happened. Like for me being old, I remember that guy, Bruce Jenner, the guy, when he was Bruce, being on like cereal boxes.
Sure,
and,
he
was an Olympic athlete, and then he was on chips
right.
or something.
The greatest athlete on the planet.
I didn't know any of this was going on. Of course, I'm not watching reality shows or anything like that. But I hear he's on one of those. He was part of what is it?
It's a Kardashian something, right?
thing where he just kind of walks around and talks to himself or something. And anyhow, then I just remember waking up one day and it's Caitlyn Jenner, and you couldn't. It's just like you had to, okay, well, great. And you couldn't just take a minute to process, I didn't even know that was going on. And I didn't know what the big deal was, but it seemed like that was a story for 3 weeks.
Wouldn't it be better to just go gender neutral then if we're going to have all these different identifications? And I don't care what people do, that's their business. But I mean, I don't know that I could keep that straight. Just to put your point, like, I'm older than I was, and I don't know how to keep track with some of these things, right? I'm pushing 50 years old, and I'm not saying that that's an excuse not to pay attention to what people are doing, but at the same time, I just don't know that it's so different to me. I don't know that I could keep all those things straight. So how would I know what their identity might be that I would then need to use a certain pronoun? Like, how am I going to keep that straight? So is it better just to do away with all sort of monikers then? I mean, I don't know.
Just call everybody by their first name?
Yeah, citizen. We tried that in France.
Oh, yeah, that's not bad. I don't know. I know that there's professors specifically that are standing up against this in Canada and getting in trouble. I forgot the guy's name.
Yeah, I read. There's a guy named Sam Harris that had he has a podcast, and there's a guy that comes on there a lot now.
Peterson. I saw him on like a Joe Rogan podcast or something.
Yeah.
Jordan Peterson. He's a professor in Canada, and he's trying to step up and say, hey, okay, we're going to be, and he's progressive. That's the thing about the left, the extreme left, that they're yelling down these professors. The professors they're yelling at are really progressive liberal professors, but they're not liberal enough, and I don't think you can be, because the left liberals have gotten to the point now where they're waiting, even for one of their own to make a mistake, to just then pounce and call them a racist or whatever they want to call them, because they like the outrage culture. Instead of just having some moderation and say, look, these people are on our side. They are progressive and they're liberal. Why don't we come up with some more uniform instead of just trying to accuse
Here's what's going to happen, though. If you have extremists on the left who are crying foul every time somebody makes a mistake they weren't even sure they were making, which is part of the point that I'm trying to say, then all you're really doing is pushing people away from your side. The further you push to either side, right or left, the further you go to the extreme, you're actually shoving other people in the opposite direction. And so I don't know that this is, there'll be a backlash somehow or some way. I just think that that's true. So I don't know.
They're creating a system which you cannot follow.
Fines don't make sense to me. Like how, you know.
I don't know the exact system, but
So what we're gonna do, we're gonna clog up the court system with gender identity issues and the fact that I didn't use a particular pronoun and now is gonna be adjudicated. That just seems like a completely, you can solve that problem in a different way rather than just throw fines out there.
That's what those professors were saying. They said we can't give the government that kind of power. We can't give them like the ability to.
Yeah, I don't like the idea.
Morality.
I like the idea of having people decide for themselves who they want to be and what they want to be. That's fantastic. That's what liberty's all about. Be you. That's fine. I don't care. But at the same time, I don't know that we then create a extra legal bracket then for people who are unable to follow certain trends. I just don't know.
My big deal is if you want to be called Q today or Zir or whatever pronoun you've got, what if you change that in a week and you want to be called something else and you didn't notify everyone properly through the correct channels? I don't even know how that would work if you wanted to change identities later. Because
Everybody has to wear a name badge. That's the new rule,
Okay.
I guess. I don't know.
I just think it's unattainable. Once again, I think we've made ourselves clear. We're all for whatever people want to do. But I don't want to restrict anybody's rights, but then don't throw it back on me that I'm supposed to keep track of all that.
Right.
Now, if it was you got 4 pronouns or something like that, I can get down with something like that. Better than 70. I don't even know what they just invent one.
Yeah.
And then get outraged.
Make sure you say your name and then say your question.
My name is PJ Weston, and I was wondering, if I eat myself, will I grow twice as big or completely disappear?
We love these thought-provoking questions.
All right, where are you starting? I'm curious about that. Like,
Definitely with the feet.
starting with the feet.
Definitely with the feet.
Okay.
Well, your real answer is you're going to die. That's your real answer. But also, you can't create something from nothing. So there's conservation of energy, there's conservation of mass. So consuming mass, your own mass can't possibly add mass to it.
Unless you become a supernova, then what? I don't know the answer to that. I'm just asking.
Then the whole Earth is in trouble.
Oh, okay.
And we should just, abandon all hope.
You're saying I would stay the same?
No, I'm saying you would die.
I don't think you get past your pinky toe. I don't think that, then you'll just bleed out and start bleeding. Ah.
Okay, so what's your pain management plan to go along with this scenario?
I don't know. I don't know. I'm just really hungry. I just wonder.
Okay.
Maybe you clip hair and chew on that for a while rather than start on other body parts that might, cause you to bleed out.
That makes sense.
All right.
Hi, I'm Lauren Freeman. In Rolling Stones magazine, they did an article called The Madness of Donald Trump. And they said, this guy is lost, and as he flails for a clue, he continues struggling violently against the conventions of his own office. The presidency has become a straitjacket, and I just want your opinions on that.
Well, we have definitely had our share of podcasts on Trump the last couple of years.
Flailing.
I've been a pretty stern critic of Trump. I don't think he knows what he's doing necessarily. Oh, somebody else just came out and called him an idiot. Remember?
Inside the administration?
Yeah, Tillerson did.
Yeah.
He called him a
Moron.
Well, General starts with M.
Mattis? No.
No, I don't think it was Matt. It seemed like it was another one. I don't know. I just heard this that he called, and that kind of is coming out now. I mean, look, I'm not in the White House, so I have no firsthand intelligence of what's going on in there. It just doesn't seem like a well-run machine, no matter what he says. So, I mean, is he flailing around? I'm sure being the president has to be one of the worst jobs in the history of jobs. And being what Donald Trump was, his whole life a billionaire, being able to just basically do whatever his heart desired his whole life, to being trapped in this.
You want to talk about a transition? Here's a guy who's trying to become the world's probably the most notable politician, and yet he has absolutely no political experience at all. That's got to be extremely problematic for anybody who would try to do that, but especially for someone in his position who has been a CEO who could snap his fingers and make things happen and have people, he surrounds himself with yes men, which is kind of what he's tried to do with his cabinet and his office staff. But that's not the way this country works, and that's not the way politics works. And for somebody to step up and tell him no for the first time in his life, I think has been a real struggle for him to get his head wrapped around.
And he wants to be
I think that's part of the problem.
He wants to be praised, obviously.
Yeah,
thanked and all that. So this is a different, somebody said when you run for president, you can make a list of pros, and then you make a list of cons. And the cons will always way outweigh the pros. The only reason anybody ever runs is because one of those pros, it means more to them than all this. Mm-hmm. And I think, of course, in Trump's case, it's being the most powerful man, and I think that's a big deal for him. And it outweighed all the negative stuff. Now, that doesn't.
But maybe
mean
that's
it's
where
a
the
good
flailing
thing.
comes in, because his transition into a political entity is very problematic for him. I just don't think that he knows how to handle that because he wasn't prepared for it going in.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure we will continue to talk about Trump and the rest of the madness of the political system. He's walking closer. Here he is.
He's going to say his name. I can feel it.
Hi, I'm Carlin Johnson. So earlier we were talking about robots and AI, and I was wondering if a robot was built so advanced that it didn't know that it was a robot, do you think, say it was you, that you would want to know that you are the robot?
Well, you could take this to simulation theory, or we could all be in some sort of simulation and not actually human, and you could go, and that's weird.
Yeah, let's start with the basic question. You posed two things there. All right, so if you, Kevin Pumphrey, were a robot and you didn't know it, but I knew it, do you think I should tell you?
I would want you to tell me, just like we want to know everything. So, I don't know. It's, AI, we've talked about this on multiple podcasts, but it seems that we're getting closer to this thing, and I'm not sure where this stops or where it goes from there, but if they're sentient, that's a big deal. Like, for instance, we know that we exist because we think, therefore I am kind of thing, right?
Sure.
We are self-conscious. We're aware of ourselves. Now, we don't feel that way. You don't feel like your hand. You don't feel like your foot. When you think of yourself, you feel like you're somewhere behind your eyes, maybe. But this thing, our body is just this vehicle that kind of moves us around through space. Mm-hmm. I doubt that most animals have that same self-awareness. They might feel also, but they don't self-examine like we do. They're not self-conscious like we are. They're not sentient.
Is it true, and you can correct me, I don't know, from a biological standpoint, our brains are basically just fleshy computers though, right?
Well, that's the thing. Is there anything magical about the gray matter in our brains? Is there anything beyond, like, for instance, most people believe in an afterlife. If you're religious, you believe that when you die, your consciousness, the self thing that we think of, does something else. Or if the lights are off and all the neurons in your brain stop, does that stop consciousness? Does that also, just like your body? So being sentient, being self-aware, we put a lot of value on that. Like, that's, we don't want to create an AI that's not that kills us all, yet they're just like rocks. They're just being logical machines, and there's no self-awareness.
Can you program empathy though? I don't know.
Well, they're trying to right now in self-driving cars. And we've talked about this before, if I'm in my car and it's self-driving, but it's not self-aware, it's not AI. It's a smart car. And there's on the sidewalk over here, there's a woman holding a child, there's a cliff over here, and it's just me in the car. The car has to quickly make a decision. Am I going to hit that, or am I going to go off the cliff and kill me? And it might be a different outcome if I have my family in the back. It might, plow through the woman and child, because there are going to be computer programmers that have to put that into these self-driving cars, which is going to be weird, right? Because you're making cars make moral decisions. Like, we instinctually probably self-preserve, right? Just like, you're in the situation, you don't just willingly go off the cliff. Maybe you do if it's just you. I know if my kids were in the back, I'm probably not going off the cliff. So having this self-awareness is the big step, right? That's the big thing between your computer, your phone. I mean, we don't think our phone has feelings. It's not self-aware. It's not looking around, tapping on me.
There's a new robotics thing though, and I can't think of who has produced this, but it's a humanoid robot who is able to compute so quickly that it can have conversations with people, and the packaging of the robot with, you know, sort of the flesh tones and the I don't know, I guess they use some sort of silicone-based covering, but it emotes. It can react to your emotions and your state. It can seemingly sense what you're feeling, and so that's sort of that next progression.
Well, that's called the uncanny theory, when robots progress to a point to where they look like us and we can't distinguish the difference. Would you treat them different? We don't treat our computers and our phones like we do each other.
Well, the concept behind this was that it's going to be a companion robot for somebody who can't, let's say that I'm elderly and everybody I've ever known has sort of gone away or we're dislocated somehow, and rather than be alone all the time, or maybe I have dementia or something, and there's nobody really there to take care of me, then this thing could be there to sort of monitor progress and be a companion in a sense to someone who needs it to. So it needs to be able to emote, is what I'm saying.
This actually is going on in China right now on a scale like they've never seen, because of their birthing restrictions that they've had for decades. The guys outnumber the girls like 5 to 1. And so there has been a huge influx of companion things. Not necessarily robots, but companion things for all the single men. Oh, the single men. Oh, wait, that's a... yeah, so in that country, it definitely is different. But I don't know. I mean, it's going to be we're going through.
It's
that
going to
right
happen.
now.
That's part of the answer. Like, we're going to have to deal with this somehow.
Yeah, if artificial intelligence, it just depends on, you just hate as the human race are we creating the next stage of evolution by producing these robots, then turn around and kill us all, yet they're not conscious, as we call it. They don't pass the Turing test. They don't, whatever. They aren't conscious. That's horrific. How do
you know when you cross that line though? If it's how does one become self-aware?
That's the thing.
That's the key, right?
Like that's like a robot. If you ask a robot how do you know that you're self-aware, they could turn right around and say, how do you know you are? And you're like,
But robotics can be combined with touch-sensitive mechanics, and so if we think, well, I'm alive because I know I can feel things and I can sense, right? We have a sensory perception. So it's not just the computing. So if we endow a computer with that, then is it really, just because it has the mechanics differently, but the processes are really the same, can we argue effectively then that it has consciousness because it can feel its surroundings and it is aware that it is a thing and then can react to you in any way, shape, or form?
well, that's the thing. Is neurologists are trying to figure out if consciousness is just a process eventually of information processing, the speed of which or the complexity of it, like our brains have, and then consciousness all of a sudden arises. That's one thing. But if those are disassociated, it's going to be interesting. I don't know. I don't know if it's going to be. The worst case scenario is that we create these godlike machines. A machine that can create any machine that can do anything.
Oh, a machine that can create a machine?
A machine that can build a machine that can do anything.
So rather than birthing,
whether it's create a universe or create your phone, a machine that can build anything and create anything, and can do it so much faster than we could. And like I've said, you could create this thing on Monday, turn around the next Monday, and you wouldn't even be able to recognize it because it just did 200,000 years worth of human work in a week.
You want to go conspiracy theory all of a sudden? Let's go down that road real quick. What do you think that with the advent of Siri and the Hey Google stuff and the home-based things, like you got Google Home and you have the Echo from Amazon and whatever the other thing is, there's another one. Anyway, Alexa, right. So we're sort of slowly conditioning people to be reliant on these machines. Like, I remember when the internet first became a big thing and you could access that and you could type in and find any information completely, and then this overload of information. But now it's gotten to the point where you don't even have to do that. You just say things and it does that work for you. So are we, in a weird way, are the machines already sentient enough to be able to whittle us down in our abilities so that they can then have an easier time with taking over. Because if we're going to become dependent on these things, I know people who already are.
Aren't we already?
How many phone numbers do you know off the top of your head?
None. Yeah, my parents.
Everything's
when
in
I
your
was a kid.
contacts list. If I don't need to turn on my lights, because I can say, "Hey Alexa, turn off the lights," does that. Hey Alexa, start my car. Hey Alexa, order something from. Or you have a smart fridge that you don't even have to look and see. It knows what you like and it knows that you're out of milk and it orders it and it shows up via some sort of drone that drops it in.
But I mean, I would
there's
make an
nothing that you
argument.
have to do.
We're completely already dependent on machines.
Well, I'm saying we get to the point where we're going to lose the ability to become independent if we're not careful.
I think we're already there, though. I really
You don't think that we could switch that over really quickly at this point?
I think if China gets AI and they shut the lights off in America and all the car batteries go away and we're without any machines, I don't know how I get home, first of all. I don't live anywhere. How do we produce food? You can't go to a store anymore. It would just be panic. I think as a society, we're already, since the second industrial revolution, whether it's air conditioning or electricity or your automobiles or any other refrigerator. I mean, refrigeration's a big deal. Like,
Sure.
I think we're already dependent on machines. It's just how far down the rabbit hole do we go with technology? And I think the internet has created a whole new situation. And that's the thing, if you create an AI that has access to the internet, well, first of all, I don't know how you'd stop it if it's an AI. I don't know. And then it has just, human history at its fingertips and could learn everything in a second. And then, I don't know where it stops from there. So.
Okay. Okay, let's hold on. Let's jump into one here. All right, so this is from Chloe Junkerman. Let's see. Should states be allowed to display the Confederate flag on government properties?
Well, let the states decide. Popular sovereignty. That's the easy answer, right? That's what a lot of politicians will do. Just leave it up to the states.
Okay, let's play this out very carefully, because I know that there is a lot of response in the South in particular about the idea that the Confederate flag represents heritage. Okay, let's talk about what it really represents. That is a battle flag of a foreign country who was trying to rip this country into two pieces and to create its own country out of what was once one. The Confederate States of America was an attempt to shatter the Union for states' rights in order to preserve the institution of slavery. So when you talk about states' rights, fantastic. It's absolutely all about slavery, and you cannot avoid that argument. And anybody who tries to bring it up differently doesn't know their history and doesn't understand what they're talking about. So let's start there. Secondly, once you have completed the Civil War and you've reunified the states and you've eliminated all of what they have tried to break away from, try to brush that back with Reconstruction. Is it out of bounds for me to suggest that we not have a foreign country's flag, especially their battle flag, flying over a federal courthouse or a state capitol that is part of the country in which we exist, which is the United States of America, not the United States of the Confederacy? They don't exist anymore. We wouldn't fly the Japanese military flag over a courthouse because we have some people who believe that that's part of their heritage. We wouldn't allow that to take place. We wouldn't allow there to be a Nazi flag flying in simultaneous aspect with the Arkansas flag, or even let that be embroidered into part of it. Like, we fought against those kind of things. So the idea that it represents some type of heritage, fantastic. Find another symbol. That's the first and foremost I want to say. Find something else that will represent your heritage besides that particular thing. Then I don't have necessarily a problem with that. It's something that is much more acceptable. But to suggest that it's okay to have someone else's flag on our stuff.
There's a difference between glorifying Confederate leaders and Confederate flags, that specific thing, because immediately people will make the leapfrog to, well, George Washington owned slaves, so we shouldn't have statues of him either. And where does it end? And obviously, you could criticize every leader. I could criticize Abraham Lincoln. I mean, it doesn't matter the leader. You can find criticisms and evil things maybe. But we're talking about a certain thing. So I think as long as you keep it about a certain thing. I mean, why do we build statues of people in the first place?
Well, let's talk about that too, because we can segue into that pretty easily. The giant controversy about whether or not we should have Confederate memorials. And when they're talking about taking those down, and the few that have come down, people will stand up there and complain and argue and yell at each other about, well, you're trying to erase our history. And folks, here's the thing. You only display statues of people in public places to honor them. That's what that's for. If you want to display something for a historic purpose, you put a marker up saying something happened right here. But if you're going to put a statue up to a person, then that needs to go into a museum, because that's where we go to study history. We don't go to our public parks to study history per se. And so anytime you see a statue to someone who fought to, listen to me, just carefully listen to me, treachery, treason against our country, against our Constitution, against our way of life. That's what those people represent. And so if you want statues of them, put them in a museum. But to put them proudly on display in front of somebody's courthouse, then you are actually advocating something that is truly anti-American.
But let's
period.
also have a broader perspective, because when I was a kid, this wasn't an issue. As a matter of fact, I had a friend who had a full rebel flag on the tailgate of his truck, and I went to a school that was about 40% minority. No one cared.
You said no one cared, but no one around you cared. That's
Well,
the
that's
difference.
exactly right. Well, that's what my point is. It's not a problem until it becomes a problem. Well, here in the last
It
3
was.
or 4 years.
My point is, it was a problem. You just didn't recognize the problem.
Correct. Yes, that's clarification. But what I'm saying is, it wasn't a problem because no one made it a problem. But now people have made it a problem. We live in a society that has recognized, hey, this. Now, you still have to have common sense with this. You still have to not make, once again, leapfrogs to other things that don't apply here. If we're specifically talking about Confederate statues, Confederate flags, I do think we can move on from those things. I don't think that makes Southern culture or our heritage any less than it's always been.
It confuses me that people take it that way, though. Like, why would that thing be?
Well, I think it's because they've seen that flag and that statue there their whole lives. I think this is something they're like, wait, it's never been a problem before, just like what I said.
Should
Like,
we have?
when I was a kid.
Should there be a John Wilkes Booth statue somewhere then that represents Southern heritage? Because he was like, if he was,
He thought he was actually doing the Confederacy a favor, saving them.
Killed the tyrant king. That's basically what he was trying to do when he assassinated Lincoln, and thought there'd be this rededication to the Confederate cause and that the war would continue, that people would rally around what he had done because Lincoln was gone and people really wanted that. Same thing when they assassinated Julius Caesar, by the way, just to make that leap. They thought that people would rally to their cause and that it was all great because Caesar was dead and he was the tyrant and people were afraid of him, and therefore that's why they didn't rebel ahead of time. So, but if we're talking about the Confederacy and we talk about people like Robert E. Lee or whoever, then, pre-Civil War, I wouldn't have a problem with having a statue of Robert E. Lee. But after that fact, when he chose state loyalty and proximity over national loyalty, then I don't think that you can do that in the same way. Not that you can't have a statue, and not that you can't remember that happened, but to celebrate the treason, I think, is problematic. And I think people have been doing that without realizing that's what they've been doing.
Yeah, that's what I was.
And yelling at me about it, because I've had conversations where people actually get mad and yell. Yelling at me doesn't change what I just said. You being mad at me for telling you the truth doesn't change the truth.
All right. As he lays down the gauntlet.
All right.
If you have a great point against what he just said, feel free.
Yeah, you can. You're welcome to come disagree with me. Anybody in here that wants to try. All right. I welcome that. Go ahead. Yeah.
Am I good? All right.
Good. Lean a little bit in.
So your point was how, like, the South, it's like, I get that the flag is technically like the battle flag, but if you really think about it, like, the way the country was built, like, it's always been North and South have been, like, battling over different ideals. And so, like, if you, like, Southern heritage, like, I'm completely losing what I was thinking over there, but, like, I'm not good at this. I completely lost it. Completely lost it. All right, so, like, all the times that, like, the North has kind of screwed over the South in different agreements and all that, like, they, like, kind of forced them into some of this stuff, like, kind of breaking away from the country.
Give me an example.
Okay, so I could bring up the Compromise of 1850. I could bring...
That screwed the South out?
Because originally what it was is it gave them the territory of New Mexico and Utah and then they basically got nothing out of it because it was also like they get the Fugitive Slave Act, and they never actually enforced that law in the North.
So are you suggesting that the Fugitive Slave Act screwed the Southern economy because they were losing people to the North who were trying to gain their civil liberties?
Well, no, what I'm like essentially saying is that like you're saying the symbol of the flag is like completely based off treason, when like in all actuality like the country basically like forced them into like a state of having to fight for what's right for the, like for their ideals specifically.
So you're suggesting that the Union caused the Southern states into such a position of anxiety that they felt they had no other recourse than to fight for their own political agenda.
In a sense, yes, because they were never like they never were given like equal opportunity.
Okay, well, let's talk about that. So what we can counter that with is the idea that you have joined a union, a political union that is geared to try to enhance the credibility of all those states. The whole reason that the Articles of Confederation didn't succeed was because there was no central power to organize those things, right? The idea that states had more rights than the Union itself was the fallacy of the Articles of Confederation. So to improve upon that and to create a better union, we build the Constitution in 1789 and have that ratified throughout the remaining years. But what that does then in turn is take your states' rights mentality and take that down several notches so that you can be who you are and do what you do, but there is a force over which will govern you and keep you in line for the betterment of the entire society. So this whole idea about creating regionalization and sectional loyalties is actually in and of itself counterproductive to the entire, to the betterment of the South itself. The Southern states were not going to be able to generate enough of an economy based on what they had because slavery was a dying institution worldwide. That was going to end whether the South broke away from the North or not. That just wasn't going to continue to be a thing. We weren't the only country going through those problems. So the problem that I see in what you're saying is that the Confederate flag representing Southern heritage and the Southern pride about trying to stand up for themselves against Northern oppressors, right? That's kind of where you were going with that, in a sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you can fight for your liberties as a state within inside a union in other ways besides open and armed rebellion against that country. And when you take up arms against the Union, then they had full reason and recourse to come through and make that stop. So, like I said, if you're going to be a separate country and you're going to fight for that, then own that. But don't act like it was the system's fault that you had to then decide to break away and slaughter your fellow man. Like that's not, it's completely counterproductive and doesn't really fit the argument that you're trying to make.
Okay, so let me like change directions here, kinda.
Okay.
So would you say that in like using that rationale that it's unjustified for like any kind of revolution throughout history? So say like France today, who celebrates the French Revolution because they were able to break away from the oppressive system they had at the time, or like the English Civil War, that kind of stuff. Where
Okay, again, I'm trying to watch you equate two different things, right? When you talk about the subjugation of 90% of your population, 98% of your population, to a system that only entrenches power to the top 2% and then the king on top of that, that's a completely different scenario than we're talking about the forced enslavement of over 4 million people inside this country who want freedom, and we're taking in a system that perpetuates that problematic condition. So I don't know that you can actually say all rebellions are not created equally. That's just what
one that's still like forced. Was it like forced labor over in France though? Like that 98%, like they were like completely holding up the country, but they were forced into it.
It wasn't slavery. No, it was based on a lack of civil liberties. I will give you that, but it's not true in slavery because they couldn't be bought and sold. And you weren't being farmed out, and your families weren't being separated, and you weren't actually creating a system where you actually had people who were being, a breeding program to continue the system that we already had in place. Like, was it immoral, the system they had? Yeah, to the same degree? No, I wouldn't say so.
Here's the thing.
Just because you feel that you're right doesn't make you right.
No, I just don't. I don't have much else to say.
Why do we have more fire drills instead of school shooter drills if more kids are dying because of the school shooting instead of fires?
Okay. All right. You want to start, or you want me to?
Okay, so listen, I remember doing, you might even remember doing nuclear bomb drills.
I'm not that old.
Oh, okay. Thank you. But I remember doing tornado drills. I remember doing fire drills. We've always done that. The school shooting phenomenon as we know it started in the 90s, I guess with Columbine.
Jacksonville.
Oh, that's going.
Or was it? No, sorry, Jonesboro. The two boys that
Oh,
shot
that's
the school
right,
in Jonesboro.
Jonesboro.
Yeah, I don't even remember their names.
So we had some that happened in the 90s, and it's every now and then it happens today. The active shooter, we got trained to some degree, I guess you would call it. The active shooter training started, 3 years here?
About 4 or 5 maybe. Yeah.
So there's a few drills that you have to do. Number one, get in your room and hide, lock the door for any external threat. Another one is there's a tornado, so get into the safest area in the building, or that could also be in your room, because some schools don't have safe room and tornado rooms. Mm-hmm. And then the other one is the building's on fire, everybody out of the building. So that's your 3 basic drills. I think the reason that the school shooting, I think people were slow to realize how big of a problem this was. I mean, and with automatic weapons and semi-automatic weapons, it's become into the hands of teenagers, to most, I guess. Some of these, I guess, might have been young adults.
Well, let me say this too. Even though we see these accounts on TV and multiple people get hurt in these incidents, obviously, the idea that the probability that we're going to see some sort of shooter event is pretty low ultimately. Out of all the multiple schools across, thousands and thousands of schools across the country, the statistic is still more probable for fire or tornado type of emergency than we would with an active shooter situation, or somebody in the community who's actually done something. Like, for example, several years ago we had a person who robbed this little convenience store down here, right? And so we went on lockdown based on that, but it wasn't like an active shooter situation. There was a gun not too far away from us, and we had to deal with that, and so we locked everything down, and people who were off campus had to stay away until they could really get that situation figured out. So I think that's part of what is going on, that we don't practice that necessarily. We practice it more than you do. Like teachers and administration, like there is a plan, and we have things in place, and we every so often we go through an actual, like, not too, how many years ago was, again, about 3
years
where
ago,
we had several law enforcement agencies and a consulting firm up here, and we did live fire drills. Well, I say live fire, it seemed like live fire. Like they had airsoft guns, and they were shooting off rounds in the building so that you could see what it would sound like and what it would feel like to have this sort of emergency situation, and then what you do based on that. So we practice some of that response time. I don't know that that's necessarily what needs to happen with students, because for 2 reasons. Number one, we have such a student turnover year to year because people graduate and move in and whatever. So you have to go through that training continuously, which isn't necessarily problematic, but at the same time, I think it's setting a precedent in the back of people's minds that they sort of half expect that it's going to happen. Like fire does happen more often than you think. Tornadoes happen more often than you
hear
think.
about every school shooting.
But you hear about every single school shooting, right? So we're much more likely to experience one of those other 2 scenarios than we are to experience a school shooter.
And there has been changes. I mean, when I taught years ago, we had a policy at one of the schools to leave the doors completely open when you taught, because the administrators wanted to be able to just walk down the hall and look and see into your classroom and what you're doing. Now we got locked doors, we got the big, chains on or whatever you call it.
Right, it's a cable, yeah.
The cables that we can really lock the doors. I mean, all that was done because of this. So we have made changes.
Those are things that actually came about after the live drill that we did with the agencies, because we realized that in order for us to secure certain rooms, like some of them were actually pretty vulnerable. So if there was an incident, we know immediately that we can take that cable and pull it over the door, and you are not getting in. You're absolutely not getting in. The doors are reinforced. They've got mesh in the glass that's there in the front, and there's absolutely no way in that room if I'm in there and I have that thing secured. And so the students in there are completely safe and all that. So, but because we don't want to live in a condition of fear, especially when the probability is so low. And I've heard people argue in the past, and we've had this conversation in class, and we will later on when we talk about modern day stuff, when we get into that moment in history. You're told a whole lot by media and by political pundits and by people trying to sell certain things, sell this idea to you actually that you need to be afraid 24/7. And honestly, that's not the world we actually live in. Like on a day-to-day basis, you're much more likely to be struck twice by lightning by going to cash a lottery ticket than you are to be a victim of a school shooting. the probability is so low it's almost inadmissible. However, anything could happen, right? Because you get those people who say that. Well, what if it does happen? Well, yeah, but most of the time, again, statistically, it's not going to. Like we're statistically never going to face that situation. So, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't prepare in any way, right? So we prepare, and then we give a general idea about what you guys are going to do, but we don't want to practice it so often that you think that there's this likelihood that it's going to happen, which actually makes this less of a learning institution and more of a prison in a sense, because we're trying to lock it down, and we're trying to build these defensive walls and all these things. We have things going on behind the scenes that you're not necessarily aware of, and I think that works better in the long run, because then you can concentrate on school, right? If it's running smoothly, you shouldn't have to worry about your safety. And if we practice those drills over and over and over again, it's almost like, you either get really afraid or you don't take it seriously if something did happen. That sense of urgency needs to be there in case that there is some sort of thing. Because again, even though the probability is low, there's still a chance somewhere down the line. We need you to be able to react and not be complacent. And if we practiced and practiced and practiced, people go, well, it's just another drill, and they wouldn't take it seriously, right? So I think that compounds it too. We know what's going to happen. We are prepared to deal with any situation, right? So that's a good question.
My name is Callie Webb. Do you guys believe in the Illuminati, not necessarily as like this huge group of people where they're like reaching out to Beyonce and stuff, but as like a group of elite people that discuss what's going on in the world and have some sort of major say?
Oh yeah, I think there's levels to all that. But I don't know how formal this group is, but we discussed earlier, are we really a democracy? Are we a republic? Or are we an oligarchy controlled by corporations and these super rich that can, and with Citizens United in 2008, where they can just throw millions and millions of dollars at a candidate. I mean, our government is controlled by money, and Illuminati, obviously, that throws up red flag. People go, well, hey, that's conspiracy theory. I mean, call it what you want. I doubt, we had Freemasons for a while. We had, all our founding fathers were members of Freemasons. That was a secret society that met in rooms, and who knows what went down. It was so secret. So
I think it's probably true that the wealthiest people of all nations probably meet together to discuss certain things, but I don't know how that then infiltrates downwards. I don't know if there's this gigantic sort of multi-tentacled entity that has this diabolical plans to control all wealth and access information across the planet. I just don't know that it's exactly like that. But it makes sense that if you have that kind of power and money, that you would want to network with other people who have that kind of power and money, and regardless of where you're from. So I think there, to a certain extent, it probably is true, but I don't know what that really means in practice. All right, let's see.
We have some written questions.
Yep. Haley Strozik, do you all believe our current curriculum best fits the stories you wish to be told? How do you wish the textbooks would approach various groups of people?
Oh, is this history?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So, do we think that we need curriculum refinement, and do our textbooks appropriate?
I think we need curriculum to. I mean, I have my own whole educational theory about education after the 9th grade. I think we live in a world where we teach way too much stuff that students don't need, and we also make school way more boring. Like, I'm forced to teach a survey U.S. history class, which is fine, but I would love to see all basic U.S., world, Euro, civics done 9th grade. Maybe 10th grade you're getting a little, because I want to diversify by the time 10th grade comes around, where students those history-minded kids can do that. Science-minded kids can do that, like the academy system they have in Europe. So these kids could actually come to school and do what they wanted instead of being forced. But I also think it's a problem when we say all kids are going to college, and we're going to teach them like every kid's going to college, when we know college is becoming even outdated. Now, I wouldn't let parents. Of course, parents are probably going to be listening to that. But I mean, I do want my kids to go to college too. But the college is not the be-all, end-all of.
The benefit of a survey class, though, is to expose people to general information that then might spark some sort of curiosity that they can then pursue later on. So I don't know, like, if let's say we keep that through the 10th grade, which I think is we do a pretty decent job of that in this school, because once you get into, if you are history minded, like, you've got a lot of variables that you can take, right, once you get to be a junior or a senior. And so then you can diversify if you want to, or you can focus on something more specific, because we have several, top-notch AP level classes here for history, and I know that we're adding things in all the time. So
If I could do anything as far as me, I would love to teach all junior level, once you become a junior, I would want people to choose to take my class, and then we could make it a special topics class. So we could either do, whatever they're interested in. I mean, we could
but
do
don't
all
you think
sorts
you
of
need
stuff.
a base knowledge before you can run with that, though?
Yes. I mean, yes, but the question is how base, like where is that end? Where's that line? Do they really need to know the Dred Scott decision's effect on where do you draw the line as far as what a kid needs? Because I don't want to teach, 30 kids that hate history and would rather be and benefit more from a science or math class at the junior and senior levels.
Well, no, yeah, I agree with that completely.
The question is backing that off because, we still teach kids like they're going to go to a farm all summer and they're going to go into factory life. We still pretty much, with the way we do the bell system, I mean, making these kids sit for 50 minutes, listen to something, and then go to we do it because it's practical, it's efficient, but it's not the best way. But I do think also with technology coming and online classes and virtual schools, I think we're in the process. I think these kids, this generation right here is going to see more in the next 15 years than we have in our past 30.
Yeah, by the time you have children in school, I don't even know that
If
we'll
there
have
is a school.
schools like this at all. Yeah, I mean, the reality is that it's going to shift.
Yep. So now let's act like we're doing the same. Let's not talk about curriculum as much because I think I've exhausted that point. But let's talk about history textbooks.
Mm-hmm.
Are we telling the stories that should be told? Well, there's been a big shift in history as far as focus on social stuff. So the plight of women and minorities and civil rights and all that, and less of a focus on military history. I know that's happened for.
Well, the shift for us, I teach world history, AP and pre-AP, but also my AP European class. I mean, we have to focus on the struggle, and that's the thing. So when we talk about military, we talk about military movements, but we also talk about the technologies that developed, but the impact on the people themselves. So there's definitely a shift away from sort of status quo way of telling the story to a more well-rounded thing, which is really what history is about the story about people and how they deal with whatever situation that they're encountering wherever they happen to live, and who's making decisions about them, and how do they then, live their lives in the midst of whatever they see. And I think that's what's ultimately intriguing about that, is because we are talking about people and their lives, and then we can reflect that into our own every time we hear their stories. That's why when you teach, if you teach history, it's sort of like almost in story form or parable form. It's so that people can reflect those situations into their own lives and then be able to make some decisions about what's happening with them, or recognize when they're being manipulated and what they can do about that. So
And you were history minded. You got into history because you liked history, or
Right.
politics, or whatever.
Yeah, right.
Because
Well, both,
you
right.
were a business owner for a while, and then you figured out. See, I came straight from college. I never had a real job, so I was a high school athlete. I'm going to be a coach. I didn't know anything about history. I took history classes like everybody. I got through. Went to college, and they said you're going to be a coach, right? I was like, yes, definitely. So they said, you got history or math? Which one you want to do? History. And so and guess what? I hated it all through college. It was just get through so I could coach. And what is weird, is when I started teaching, I actually started to like it because I finally, for the first time in my life, I actually started learning about the stories, and I made the connections that most of these kids probably have already made. I'm a little slower.
History can be ultimately extremely boring if you're just looking at dates and facts and trying to memorize things. But like I said, we're all social creatures to some extent. And I know that some people, are more socially active than others, but at the same time, we're part of a society, and we have to figure out our placement in that. And so, true history is about people in society and the struggles that they go through, and that's never going to be boring if you are able to get to that point to be able to teach it on that.
All right, here's my dream history class. You ready?
All right, yep.
All right, just for me. You would come into my class on the first day of school, and I would spend a semester teaching you the basic stuff you need to know of all of American history. And then the next semester, we would travel around the country, and I would take you to all these places that we just learned about.
That would be awesome.
That would be my premier history class.